I'm Elliot Kleinberg, and this is Something Went Horribly Wrong, a blog about bad writing and how to fix it. Segment 77, Watts in a Name. Now, last time we did a segment on eponyms, words named for people, and there were so many we had to do another segment. Here we go. Number one, Bluetooth, right? One of these, right? The Scandinavian makers of the revolutionary wireless device named it for 10th century King Harald Bluetooth Gormson, noted for a dead, discolored tooth. You can't make that up. Ferris wheel. Pittsburgh structural engineer George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., who inspected steel for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, brought up the idea for an enormous metal wheel to rival the Eiffel Tower. Freudian slip. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, described these speaking errors that reveal secret thoughts, usually sexual. Jacuzzi. The Jacuzzi family, early 20th century Italian immigrants, developed various forms of water pumps in California. In 1968, Roy Jacuzzi created the world's first integrated whirlpool bath. Mach 1. The sound barrier is named for Austrian physicist Ernst Mach, the first to systematically study supersonic motion in the 1880s. He made important contributions to understanding the Doppler effect and influenced a young Albert Einstein, who called Mach the philosophical forerunner of relativity theory. Marxism. German philosopher Karl Marx co-wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 and authored Das Kapital in 1867. Both books predicted the collapse of capitalism and championed pure socialism. His writings inspired many early 20th century communist regimes. Molotov cocktail. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in November of 1939, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov claimed his forces were dropping not bombs, but humanitarian food packages. That prompted Finns to sarcastically label the bombs as Molotov picnic baskets and later to use the term Molotov cocktails for their own improvised firebombs of glass bottles, gasoline, and cloth wicks. Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will. The most accepted origin theory is that during a test at what's now Edwards Air Force Base in California, some sensors were installed backward, prompting engineer Captain Edward A. Murphy to utter a variation of the infamous phrase. Wordorigins.org says it found several versions dating back to the Roman Empire. Jim Crow. Well, starting in 1828, performer Thomas Dartmouth, Daddy Rice, had a successful stage act in blackface as an exaggerated, highly stereotypical character. Soon the phrase became a racial slur. By the end of the 1800s, it instead described laws and customs that oppressed African Americans. Lynching. During the American Revolution, Charles Lynch, a Virginia planter and justice of the peace, headed an irregular vigilante court formed to punish loyalists outside of due process. Ponzi scheme. In 1920, the Italian immigrant had launched the scam, now named for him, in which existing investors were paid with money collected from new investors. Ponzi went to prison. Salmonella poisoning. In the late 1800s, veterinarian Daniel Elmer Salmon was first chief of the Federal Bureau of Animal Industry and established its division of animal pathology. A colleague who first identified the bacteria behind a disease named it for salmon. Teddy bear. President Theodore Roosevelt came up empty during a 1902 hunting trip in Mississippi. An assistant cornered a black bear and tied it to a tree, and associates brought the president over. He refused to shoot it. A political cartoon satirizing the incident inspired a Brooklyn businessman to create a stuffed toy Teddy's bear. Volt and watt. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, Italian physicist Alessandro Volta made a number of discoveries in the early field of electricity, leading scientists to name for him the unit of electromagnetic force. Scottish engineer James Watt's improvements to the steam engine were a significant factor in the Industrial Revolution, and in the late 1800s, pairing the Watt engine with Thomas Edison's electrical generator allowed generation of electricity on a large scale. Zamboni. In 1940, refrigeration businessman Frank Zamboni and relatives opened a giant ice skating rink in Southern California. At the time, resurfacing ice was done by hand and took several workers more than an hour. In 1949, Frank developed a machine that would shave the ice, remove shavings, and wash and squeegee the surface. Next time, more words that are names. Ye gods. I'm Elliot Kleinberg. Visit www.ekfla.com. That's ekfla.com.